flowers were perfect. Every white rose had been hand-selected 2 days before the ceremony by a florist flown in from New York. The music, a string quartet playing Pachelbel's canon, drifted softly through the cathedral's vaulted ceiling draped in ivory silk. 300 guests sat in elegant, expectant silence, dressed in their finest, murmuring quietly with the polite excitement of people witnessing something historic. The union of Marcus Hale, one of America's most formidable self-made billionaires, was not merely a wedding, it was an event. The champagne was already chilling in crystal flutes, the caterers were standing by, everything was flawless, deliberate, and utterly under control. And then, it all stopped. Not from a fire alarm, not from a medical emergency, not from a dramatic ex-lover bursting through the oak doors. It stopped because of a 7-year-old girl in a yellow dress who walked slowly and quietly down the center aisle, not carrying flowers, but carrying a small white envelope held carefully in both hands, with the seriousness of a child who has been told that what she carries matters very much. She walked the full length of the aisle. She passed 300 pairs of eyes, every one of them trying to make sense of what they were seeing. She reached the altar, she looked up at the tall man in the perfectly tailored charcoal suit, and she held out the envelope. He took it, he opened it, he read it. In front of 300 witnesses, his face went completely white. He looked at his bride, he looked at the little girl, and then, with a voice barely above a whisper that somehow carried to every corner of that silent cathedral, he said 4 words no one had prepared themselves to hear. "We need to stop this." What was in that envelope? Who sent that child? What secret had been living quietly in the shadow of one of America's most powerful men for nearly 8 years? And why had it chosen this precise, public, irreversible moment to arrive? Stay with me. This story is not what you think it is, and I promise you, the twist will not be what you expected. To understand what happened in that cathedral, you need to understand the man standing at that altar. His name was Marcus Hale, 51 years old, self-made billionaire, son of a mechanic from rural Ohio who had built everything from nothing, working double shifts at 18, sleeping in his car at 22, launching his first logistics company at 26 with a used truck and a single cold-called client. By 40, he was worth over $800 million. By 50, Forbes had him at $1.4 billion. He commanded every room he entered, not through arrogance, but through the quiet, unshakable confidence of a man who has built everything from scratch and watched it fall and built it back again. But here's the thing the business profiles never captured. Marcus Hale was profoundly lonely. He had poured so much of himself into his empire that his personal life had been consistently left behind. A marriage in his 30s that had dissolved slowly, without drama, under the weight of his absence. No children, or so he believed. A series of relationships over the years, each one genuine in its beginning, each one eventually outrun by his schedule and his inability to be fully present for anything that didn't have a deadline. And then, 3 years before that wedding day, he met Vanessa Cole. 42 years old, former investment banker turned philanthropist. Sharp cheekbones, Harvard MBA, and a laugh that could fill a room and make everyone in it feel included. They met at a fundraiser for pediatric cancer research that she had organized entirely herself. He had written a check for $2 million and was preparing to leave early when she stopped him at the coat check and said, without flattery or calculation, "Money is the easy part. Time is harder. Will you give us that too?" The next morning, he told his assistant to block 2 Saturdays per month permanently. Within 6 months, they were inseparable. Within a year, he had proposed on the rooftop of his Chicago penthouse, just the two of them, and the city spread below like a map of everything he had built. She said yes immediately. The wedding was planned with care and scale. 300 guests, a cathedral in downtown Chicago, a Mediterranean honeymoon on a private yacht, every detail settled, every detail perfect. And then a little girl in a yellow dress walked down the aisle. To understand that girl, you have to go back 8 years. The real story begins not at the wedding, but in Atlanta in the fall of 2016, when Marcus was in the city finalizing a major logistics acquisition. The negotiations had been grinding for weeks. One night, after a brutal 12-hour session, his junior partner Derek insisted they all go out for dinner. No laptops, no deal talk, just a human evening. Marcus resisted. He went anyway. The restaurant was a rooftop place in Midtown. Warm October air, the city glittering below. His group was seated beside a birthday party already well into the evening's celebrations, and it was there that Marcus met a woman named Diane. Diane was 34, a pediatric nurse at a children's hospital. She had come to celebrate her closest friend's birthday and absolutely had no idea who Marcus Hale was. She didn't Google him until 3 days later, after they had already spent 2 evenings talking about their childhoods, the books they actually finished versus the ones they only meant to read, why hope feels different from optimism, and whether the difference matters. She had grown up in rural Georgia. He had grown up in rural Ohio. They both understood, without needing to explain it, what it meant to have grown up without enough. For one unexpected, brief, brilliant week, Marcus felt something he had not felt in years. Genuinely seen. Not as a billionaire, not as a transaction, just as a person. But the deal closed. The jet was waiting. He flew back to Chicago and back into the machinery of his life. They exchanged numbers. They texted for a few weeks. Warm, slightly cautious messages that felt precious because they were still fragile. And then, slowly, without a single moment of clear ending, the messages thinned, the silences stretched, and both of them quietly let go. He never found out, because Diane chose not to tell him. She had known she was pregnant within 6 weeks of that Atlanta trip. She made a decision, quiet, painful, deeply considered, that she would raise this child alone. She had grown up without a father herself. She knew how to do it. And honestly, looking at who Marcus Hale was, a man whose personal life he had described to her with weary resignation, a billionaire consumed by an empire, she had convinced herself it was simpler this way, cleaner, better for everyone. She had a daughter. She named her Lily. For 7 years, that was the whole world. Diane raised Lily in a small house near a good school in Atlanta. Dance classes on Saturdays, holidays with her mother, birthday parties with handmade banners and too much frosting on the cake. A life modest in its material trappings and genuinely rich in everything that mattered. Lily was bright and curious and asked questions at dinner that made the table go quiet. Questions like, "Where is my dad?" and "Does he know about me?" Diane always answered honestly and gently. Her father was a good man who simply did not know she existed. Someday, they would talk about it more. And then, in late 2023, everything changed. Diane was diagnosed with aggressive breast cancer, stage 3, the kind of diagnosis that reorders everything, your calendar, your priorities, your deepest fears. Suddenly, the future she had assumed she had years to prepare for was rushing towards her like a freight train, and the question she had set aside for 7 years became urgent and undeniable. What would happen to Lily if something happened to her? She had no siblings. Her mother was elderly and unwell. She had wonderful friends, but none in a position to take on a child long term. And so, for the first time in 7 years, Diane seriously thought about Marcus Hale. She had kept up with his life at a distance, the Forbes profiles, the company news, and recently the engagement announcement. She had read all of it with feelings she couldn't quite name. But when she sat across from her oncologist and heard the words, "We need to discuss long-term planning," something fundamental shifted inside her. She had a DNA test done. The results confirmed what she had always known. And then she made the hardest decision of her life. Not to show up demanding anything, not to threaten or manipulate, but to deliver the truth clearly, directly, and at a moment that it could not be managed or filtered away. She wrote a letter. 2 pages, handwritten, every sentence precise and without drama. She included the laboratory results. She included a photograph of Lily. She called in a favor from a former colleague in Chicago, arranged for a trusted friend to bring Lily to the cathedral, and made sure the little girl in the yellow dress delivered the envelope herself, not to make a scene, simply to make sure the truth arrived before it was too late. When Marcus opened that envelope at the altar, the first thing he saw was the photograph. A school picture of a little girl, dark eyes that were unmistakably precisely his own staring back at him. Then the letter, then the laboratory document. Probability of paternity, 99.98%. He stood completely still.
Vanessa stepped forward in her white dress, her expression shifting from concern to something quieter. She had already read the shape of what was happening before he said a word. He looked at the little girl in the front row, he looked at his bride, and he said, "I need everyone to give me a moment."